Welcome, folks. You're listening to the A Minute to Midnight show, and this is Tony. And today on the show, I have Stan Deyo, who I'm sure needs no introduction to most of you. What a great guy he is to have. I really look forward to interviewing Stan, and today is certainly no exception. Thoroughly fascinating show. And also Stan has sent me a lot of images to go with the show, so this is one of those ones where you'll want to watch the video. It'll help you understand what he's talking about because there will be a lot of images helping to explain it. We welcome Stan Deyo back to the A Minute to Midnight show. It's been quite a few months since you were last on the show, Stan, so it's really great to have you back on today.
Thank you for inviting me. A lot of things have happened between then and now, so I'm sure we can get into that later in the show.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I got to say I really look forward to it. I really enjoyed the other times I've interviewed you, so it's sort of like a bit of a treat. on my behalf. So yeah, it's great. It's that, so much always comes out that fascinates me. So it seems to be that the signs that all is not so well on planet Earth are increasing significantly, just as Jesus foretold in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and other places. And as we get closer to his return, this is going to increase. So what are you seeing as some of the most significant signs of the times that are happening right now?
Well, the first thing is the obvious thing in prophecy. Israel is God's time clock for, the history and the future of the world. And when Israel became a nation again in May of 1948, that started, in my opinion, many others that study the Bible, that started the beginning of the generation that would see the end of this age, where the Gentiles, of course, do the witness for God. And at the end of this age, the witness goes back to the house of Israel. So we're right on the verge of starting, I think, the 7 years of tribulation spoken of in the Bible in several places. The man of sin, the Antichrist of this age, may or may not have to be revealed before the tribulation starts. But I'm reminded that we're told in the New Testament that in Paul's address to the Thessalonians, he says, look, you've been worrying about being missed by the rapture. He says, has the Antichrist or has the man of sin been revealed yet? And of course the answer was no. And so that meant to say, well, okay, when he's revealed, then the rapture can occur, or if you see him revealed, then the rapture's already occurred and you've been missed. I don't know. It's kind of ambiguous. But that's one of the signs. And then, of course, all the signs in the world, in geology and geography and weather, crazy weather patterns, increase in earthquakes and volcanoes. In fact, we're seeing a steep increase this year, or last year and into this first month of 2017. Wars and rumors of wars. Well, we've certainly got that on our plate now, and we may break out with a skirmish or a full-fledged war in light of the new change to the White House and new policies being instituted that may irritate some of the other countries that don't like us anyway. But the Middle East is the focal point for this. Israel is the focal point. So if we watch Israel and the surrounding nations, it goes out from there and into the other nations of the world as far as discord and wanting to fight each other. We know the Russians would rather have us out of the way if they are going to, help, say, like Syria and go down into Israel and invade it. So we look for the United States being neutered as far as a major military power before that can happen. But that possibility, that probability is there, and it's close to fulfilling part of the prophecies for the end of the age. I do think we're there, and I do think we're close to a time when there will be a rapture of the believers. When exactly, anybody's guess at this point, but I think we're there.
Yes, well, it's certainly increasing, and I agree about Israel and 1948 being the beginning of that time clock, and of course 1967 when they captured Jerusalem is another big signpost along the way.
Yes.
And so we're quite a way on from there. So if this is the last generation, it must be ramping up.
Tony, I think about kind of out of the box on these kind of things. And I'm thinking, okay, Israel is surrounded by nations, Muslim Arab nations, that want to destroy her. They don't want Israel to exist at all. They deny its right to exist. Now, if they do attack, and I think the Saudis could lead a consortium of the 34 Arab nations they've joined together, ostensibly to fight Iran and ISIS, but if this consortium turns and goes toward Israel, invades Israel, they will be stopped. And they will be stopped with a fiery consumption. And I think that that's going to be when Israel releases some of the several hundred nuclear weapons they have, which may be neutron-type bombs, which destroy life but not real estate and buildings. But anyway, if and when that happens, the nations of the world are going to be frightened of Israel because they've seen Israel use weapons that are extraordinary, even by today's standards. And they will be afraid that Israel may stir up more problems around the region there by the use of these weapons. Now, that would be a time for the nations of the world to come to Israel and say, look, let's make an agreement, a peace treaty. Let's just have peace for this 7-year period. And, will you sign this agreement? And they say that the Antichrist of this age, he'll ratify that treaty. Now, I don't know whether that means he initiates it, whether he just signs it, but he will ratify that treaty. And the invaders, in this case, I think will be led by Saudi Arabia, and they do have a prince there, and he could be called the Prince of the Covenant between the nations and Israel. And that prince's name at the moment, if he indeed is the one that's going to ratify that, is Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Now, you and I have talked about that
yes.
in the past. Anyway, so that's kind of what we see at the moment, the increase in war, and Israel going to have to flex its military technology to the point it scares the world to death. I think we're getting very close to that time.
Yes, well, it will certainly be interesting to watch. So what about what's happening with the weather? Is there man-made climate change, or is there something going on in the cosmos that's affecting planet Earth? I was just saying to you off air that this is the worst summer I can ever remember here in New Zealand where I am. This just hasn't been one, and I've never experienced anything like this before. So it makes me think, this weather is it's just unpredictable.
Well, we're having problems with the sun. The sun is a major driver of the weather on all the planets in our solar system. The sun at the moment has a huge coronal hole in its corona, that part of the atmosphere of the sun. It probably takes up only 20%, 25% of what you can see on this side, but it is emitting intense solar wind, high-speed protons and other particles of mass out into a spiraling solar wind that goes through the solar system. Now, we get some of the solar wind all the time, but intensity increases when we have a coronal hole pass our way, or when a coronal mass ejection or a flare comes our direction. Earth is not the only planet of the 5 inner planets, for sure, that is warming. The other planets are warming. Mercury, Venus, Mars. They're warming as well because of the output from the sun. This is supposed to be a quiet period of the sun, no sunspots, minimal activity, the bottom of the 11.5-year solar sunspot cycle, but it's not behaving properly. And because of that, we're seeing changes in our weather here on Earth. A small percentage of these heating changes and weather and climate changes are due to human energy, to human consumption, and that can be releasing greenhouse gases. That can be just the pure energy of using electricity and gas and coal and other things. That is a small percentage. Certainly that did not happen to end the last ice age or before the last age to cause it. These were changes in the sun where our global mean temperature dropped by 2 degrees centigrade to 3 degrees centigrade, depending on how you read the data. And then we're now seeing it start to rise. I think without humans, it would have done this, and we would have a cycle of ice ages come and go. Right now, we're experiencing here in the Northern Hemisphere very atypical weather. we're seeing flooding in areas, drought in areas, super tornadic activity. We had 19 here in one day here in the South here just a few weeks ago. And we're not even supposed to have that many for the month. I mean, it's, for January, it was an exceptional amount in one day. So we're getting bad weather. You're getting bad weather or strange weather down there. For the last 2 years here in the United States, we've seen an early spring and a false, spring where it started, and then as buds on the plant started to come out, it went to a deep freeze and killed all the buds on the trees, and killed a lot of trees. In fact, you give them what they call sun scorch on one side. So, yeah, there are changes here, and they're not all man-made, and there's still kind of a very interesting argument on both sides of the coin about whether we are in a global warming period or we're going into a glaciation period again. You can have strange heating effects without going into an ice age, and vice versa. You can have a shortage of it and still go into global warming. So what I'm trying to say is that we are in a state of change. I think it's primarily linked to the sun's activity, which may get even worse as we go on, because like prophecy does talk about the sun, Matthew does talk about the sun going dark and the moon not giving her light for a period of time. What would happen? Look at the picture of the sun today, in the Soho image bank, and you see that great dark coronal hole. What would happen if that spread all over, or if sunspots spread all over the sun and blocked 95% of the light coming out during some transition phase? That would make the sun appear as though you were viewing it through a sackcloth of hair with little pinpoints of light, but the rest of it's all dark. That would reduce the reflected light from the moon so much that it would be reddish, like a cloud that has surrounded the sun, and then, the light coming from the sun that does come out goes through that cloud and paints the moonlight red. All these things are functions of the sun, and it's mentioned several times in not only the book of the Revelation, but in Matthew and other places, and in the Old Testament. This tells us that a cloud will appear around the sun, and the light of the sun will diminish, to almost nothing. And then there's a point where the sun becomes as bright as day and fries about a third of the planet, boiling the seas and killing fish and burning green grass and trees for a short period of time. Now, I think that will be some kind of a flare coming off of the sun, like maybe even an entrance into the beginning of a red giant stage. But whatever it is will hit one side of the planet that's facing it, rapidly, consuming it, and then that whatever that bright increase in light is from the sun will stop as the rotation of the Earth continues. So whatever side of the Earth is facing, and be about a third of the surface area, is what's going to get hit. And you can calculate that. That's correct. That's what the Bible said. So, yeah, the weather is strange. It's changing, and I think the only constant is going to be change in the weather. I've said this many times. Because of the changes in the sun, we're going to see extreme elevations of heat, thunderstorms, and of cold periods, and snowstorms and stuff in strange places on the planet, hurricanes coming up over land and stuff like that. We're not totally there yet, but we're entering into that period now.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, when you say about snow in strange places now, let's say it's summer here, and I got up one morning to see fresh snow on the ranges, which is really something I've not seen before. That's January is our summer, and it was like, what is going on here? But so the Earth's shield, is that being affected here? And also, is there a correlation between the weather and the increase in earthquakes and volcanoes? Are they actually related, or is these two separate things causing all of this?
Well, in one way, Tony, they are interactive. When you have volcanoes, more of them, which we're seeing now, and they're spewing higher ash clouds up into the atmosphere, this tends to cool the areas where the cloud covers, and that alters the weather. Now, it doesn't alter the climate unless you have a continuous source of these erupting volcanoes doing that. Earthquakes, well, earthquakes can be triggered by the phases of the moon. The moon gets closer, and its gravitational tides move not only the water, but they make land tides, and they move the land up and down, which might loosen earthquakes that are about to happen anyway. But you also have rainstorms, severe storms, and these deposit lots of water over areas that may not have had it in a long time, and the water seeps down into the formations under that. And if they're earthquake prone and just balanced precariously, needing a bit of lubrication, that can lubricate a quake. So in that respect, they're related. But other than that, the earthquakes I don't see in general affecting the weather or the climate. The earthquakes are being caused by something else, which is officially unproven yet, but in my opinion, it is the situation that is creating the sinkholes all over the planet and increase in earthquakes is the planet is actually starting to expand a bit. Now, it's done this before, and this is the topic of conversation with a lot of the leading geophysicists of the age, and certainly those of us who are outside the school of geophysics, but still trying to put the point across, is that the Earth has changed diameter. And in fact, the Earth has at one time been upside down, and the sun used to rise in the west. This is all part of arguments I'm putting into a new book on finding the Garden of Eden and finding Atlantis, and how they were affected by the pole inversion and by an asteroid, a huge asteroid hitting East India and causing the Earth to expand to its present diameter, which is about 33% more than it was originally. It's if you shrink the Earth down, you shrink it down 25%, but if you expand it, it's a third of the original diameter of the Earth. So all these things do point to a number of other issues causing the changes in weather, the changes in earthquake activity and volcanoes. And they are part of the driver. The sun is the other part of the driver. And if it puts out too much energy or not as much energy as it used to, or an oscillating state of both of those, this can and does affect our weather. So look at what you're seeing now. You're seeing something where you are that is exceptional. It is not the norm. And this is what I've been predicting would happen when the activity from the sun starts to pump energy into our weather system here, more than normal, and it will cause increased hot spots, increased cold spots, and in between them there will be terrific electrical storms and tornadoes and hurricanes form as the energy is redistributed over the surface of the planet. Not good news for a while, but it will pass.
Yeah, this is kind of in left field, but it's been something I've been thinking about a little bit lately. A few times I've thought, they tell us that the Earth is made up of such and such and so and so, and there's certain layers of magma. And how do they actually know this? Because is this just an educated guess? Because no one can go to the center of the Earth or, 600 miles down into the Earth. How do we actually really know what it's made up of on the inside?
Well, that's really a pretty good question, because what does happen is the scientists use seismic events, large earthquakes, and they take the readings from where the earthquake occurred and to where it was felt in this part of the planet and that part of the planet, and they see that there are two sets of waves that come from a single earthquake back to their seismometers. One set is the primary set of waves that come across the surface of the planet, and the other set is the secondary waves, the S waves, that go down into the planet under the mantle and bounce off something, a layer down there, and then back over to the seismometer. And so there's a delay between the primary and the secondary wave, and they can tell from that delay, how far or through what kind of mass density that secondary wave traveled. So their bouncing waves are using waves that are created by earthquakes and stuff and lunar tides. They're using those waves to estimate how far down, what diameter of whatever it is, whether it be magma or, a solid compressed iron, nickel, vanadium core, whatever. They have not dug down to it. They are extrapolating their data with what they think the Earth is like inside. They think it's solid. That it's like, when I say solid, there are no cavities, no empty shells. There's just the surface that's cooled, and then you get hotter going down, and then you hit to the layers under the mantle, which you're floating on a kind of viscous hot mass, and then from there it's supposed to get hotter and hotter all the way down to the center, to the core of the planet, which might be 600 miles in diameter, and very compressed. And they look at the mass of the Earth as it reacts to satellites. They know the mass of the satellite. They know how the satellites bobble in their orbit going around the Earth, and from that they can then calculate the mass of the Earth, gravitational mass of the Earth, which varies, by the way, over mountain ranges and over the sea. There's great difference in the pull of gravity on the satellites there. Now, underneath the mantle, the crust of the earth and the mantle, the crust sits on the mantle. It's a very shallow area, really. It's where you see this magma, this viscous flow of superheated materials. And then it gets, hotter going down. That layer of viscous material that touches the bottom of our mantle is like very slushy ball bearings, in essence, so that with a little bit of a shove, the entire crust and mantle of the earth could slide some direction. So when they calculate, the earth could not have been, upside down at any point in time, or the earth could not have been tilted on its axis by a meteor or an asteroid unless it was such and such size traveling such and such speed, they are making a mistake in that they're using calculations assuming the earth is solid, or at least, no vacant spaces in it, all the way from the crust down to the core. And that's not correct. The gravity of the earth varies. If you get further away, the gravity diminishes. If you get closer down toward the core, the gravity increases to a point. Before the earth expanded, the gravity of the earth, let's call it, was 1. When the earth expanded, its mass didn't change. It opened up a shell, at least one shell of void space between the crust, the mantle, and what's inside the planet. Now, I am pretty sure that what they're measuring as the first, the secondary wave bounce point is the other side of that shell, that void, because the mass hasn't changed and the gravity's gotten less on the surface, because we have the same amount of mass occupying a greater radius or diameter. That means that on the surface of the planet, we would experience less gravitational force or acceleration than we would have if we were standing in the same spot when the Earth was back at its original size. How did I get off on that? Where were we heading with that?
That's fascinating. We're talking about what the Earth is actually made of. So my question here is then, could we see another pole shift? I mean, what would it take to cause that?
Yeah, you don't have to have the inner core magma, that superheated and conducting metallic core. You don't have to have that flip upside down. It can, and it has, but we can have a pole reversal if a large asteroid strikes the mantle at a shallow angle and causes it to skid, to slide over that viscous layer beneath the mantle. It could cause, it's like, it's like the cream on your coffee, like if you have a mocha coffee, you got a cream layer on the top, you can blow that and move that skim layer over to the side of the cup without moving all the coffee beneath it, you see? So that's the surface of the earth is like a skim layer on your coffee, and if it's hit sideways by a large mass, it can cause that can cause the mantle to shift greatly and even flip upside down. Now, I think that happened. Immanuel Velikovsky in Worlds in Collision thought it might happen. I mean, he even dug up records from the Egyptians and from Herodotus, from the old the Greek historian, and from the Aztecs. In their like codices of the history, they have talked about when the sun came up on the west side, and not where it is now. This could happen without a magnetic pole reversal. In your mind, envision the Earth in front of you, North Pole at the top of your head, and South Downey, and it's spinning around in a counterclockwise direction as it goes around the sun. Now, if you have that skim surface and you reach out with your imaginary hand and you grab the surface and scoot it around till it's upside down, it can be upside down and the core can still be going in the same direction it was before. And eventually, the Earth will catch up with it in a few hours, the mantle. And, as far as the inhabitants are concerned, there may have been a time when the stars seemed to be kind of holding one spot or slowly drifting, and then the sun rises up the next morning on the other side of the world, like the west instead of the east, or east of the west. Now, that did happen. I'm positive. With the reports we see in the Egyptian records, they say that there were historically 2 times when the sun set in the west, and 2 when it set in the east. And these are from records that are, scratched in stela and carved in hieroglyphics. And one of them shows the projection of the star patterns in a ceiling there. I think it was in Queen Hatshepsut put in Senmut, and they have the zodiac backwards on the ceiling because, of course, west was in a different place. It was where east is now. So yes, these can happen, and they can happen without a massive world-destroying collision. I found the footprints of in the ocean bottoms and in the landforms in the Indian Ocean and in China and on the west coast of the South American countries. I found the footprints of 5 asteroids that hit, that only one of them has actually been officially recognized, and that's called the Eltanin asteroid impact in southern Argentina, down in between there and the South Pole, and it left like a pathway of pushed up seabed. And so this happened so long ago that the Earth's surface was still kind of pliable. And instead of hitting and making a crater, it hit at a low angle because it was coming in kind of semi-orbiting the Earth and collapsed into the Earth sideways and skidded along, a 1,000-mile trail. Another one like that in eastern India at the Cuddapah region there, the Cuddapah Basin. So all these things tell us that several somethings, large and massive, at least 15 miles in diameter, hit the Earth's surface moved, and after that, the Earth's diameter changed. It expanded over the next 100 years or so.
Wow, that's really interesting. One of my listeners sort of said, "Oh, you've got to ask Stan if he's got any more updates on the discovery of the Garden of Eden, and also Atlantis, I guess, from my point of view. Have you got any sort of new stuff on either of those?"
Yeah, Tony, what I was just telling you was part of that, about the flipping of the surface of the Earth rather than, the whole core and everything, that huge mass underneath the surface. Because of the flipping upside down, on the Garden of Eden, it tells us that when Moses was recounting the story and putting it into Genesis, that he was talking as though he were west of the Garden of Eden, or the record of it, the person telling it was west of the Garden of Eden, and the Garden of Eden was to the east of him. And he was using modern east as opposed to, Egyptian east, because Garden of Eden, of course, being in Tanzania, would be east of Egypt. And that is just a small addition there. But as far as Atlantis, well, wow. I'm preparing a video to put up on the YouTube channel I've got, telling about my discovery of Atlantis. And primary to this is doesn't even need to have the poles, upside down. It's the size of the Earth. If the Earth were, 25% smaller and all the continents were together in what was Pangaea, where all the land masses were together and only had large rivers within it, if you look at that Earth, then you can find the Garden of Eden was right next door, connected by a very narrow strait to what is Saudi Arabia today, but what was Atlantis then. And you can see where the migration path of Adam and Eve's descendants in the Omo Valley in northeast Africa went down across to it's called the Gulf of Aden now, but right into Yemen there, and across that bridge over into Saudi Arabia, and they met one of the 12 sons of God that Plato wrote about, named Poseidon, and his angels that came with him, or his fallen ones. They mated with the women of Earth and produced hybrid beings. Now, for a long time, we never put the flood of Noah and where Noah dwelt at that time in connection with Atlantis. But this does allow us to see that, where the impure genetic structure was the angelic beings that came with Poseidon, crossing with human DNA coming out of the Garden of Eden, formed hybrid giants and weird people that were, offshoot of this mixed genetic pool. They were impure generations, but Noah was found perfect in his generation, as it says, and that's why he and his family were saved out of the flood, which was sweeping hot tsunamis that came across the area and left deposits of water all over that area and left it underwater. It was destroying all of the bad flesh, as it said, the corrupted DNA that was caused by Poseidon and his angels crossbreeding with mankind. Now, what people also don't think about, that say, Atlantis, great legend. Poseidon was one of 12 sons of God that came to earth. Now, the others may have been in Central America for the Aztec Mayan references to, the gods that were there, the ancient gods, and into China and the Middle East and into Asia. They landed everywhere. They divided the planet amongst them and themselves. And Plato's record tells you that. There were 12 regions, and Poseidon and Atlantis was only one of them. So that's why we're finding evidence of advanced similar technology in pyramid building and architecture stuff in Central America, in northern South America, in Europe, in Malaysia, in Egypt, of course. That's why there's similar technologies, because they all had the knowledge when they came to the earth. And the only reason we have the Atlantean story is because it was bigger than the rest, it was more prosperous, and it had a wider influence over the region. The Mount, what is it, is it Mount Horeb? Where did the angels descend? I forget.
Yeah,
over in
I think it was. Horeb. Yep.
Anyway, they descended there, and that's now what's part of the Golan Heights region. And that is where the giant king in the Bible named Og, that's where he had his kingdom and where he had his giant people. And, they were buried. There were 13 volcanoes that erupted over a period of time and completely covered the land of Og, the giants, in layers of lava that's now frozen. And it's still, that whole area still got hot spots spewing up black chunks and making mounds from the volcanic activity underneath it. That's where, and south of there, just down toward the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, I think it is, Ogmios was one of the sons of Poseidon, and there is a town there with that name going back to that time. So I've tracked down bits and pieces of surviving names and places that were the sons of Poseidon. He had 5 pairs of twins, and 5 sets of twins by his wife Cleito, who was a human. I found his palace island to the exact dimension and the exact position where it's supposed to be to the landmass of the continent or the island of Atlantis, because all of Saudi Arabia up to Aleppo, near Syria there, all of it was separated from North Africa and from Europe and Asia. It was an island with water completely surrounding it. It had an area of about 1.3 million square miles. When the earth changes happened and when the asteroid hit over in India, it tilted Saudi Arabia down on the Indian side and raised it up in the Mediterranean side by at least 1,600 feet. And it stopped the waterway from the Mediterranean draining straight into the Persian Gulf. That whole area was filled with soot, with sediment and mud after the impact and the flood that occurred in that year that's written about in Genesis about Noah's flood. The island capital of Atlantis, the little tiny one where Poseidon lived, is called Dammam Island, Dammam Island. It is the only island. It's now joined to the landmass of Saudi Arabia, but it was under enough water in the area that there was a separation from Saudi Arabia's eastern coast to Dammam, and it was an island itself. So there were 2 islands, Atlantis and Poseidon's island next to it. I found that, I measured it. It fits exactly the dimensions that Plato recorded, and it's exactly where the drainage from a large semi-flat plain of growing, which is called Atlantis' plain. It was 110 miles wide, 330 miles long, and it formed a rectangular area, which I found, and I've got that in my lecture, which I'm going to try to put up here soon on the internet. I found that, and I found where it drained into the ocean right next to Dammam Island, and where you could go into the deep sea of what's called the Arabian Gulf now. It used to be called the Persian Gulf, and before that it was the Atlantic. And they've been looking, everyone's been trying to find Atlantis using Plato's description, has been looking to the west, where we are now to the west, to the Pillars of Hercules, and they have forgotten 2 things. They didn't pay attention to it. In Plato's account, he refers to the Straits of Hercules and to the Pillars of Hercules. And if the earth was upside down, then west would have been into Syria-Turkey border there, and it would have come straight into Aleppo, just southeast of Aleppo, and into the Persian Gulf. So I've put all these things together. I mean, there are just so many perfect matches for what Plato said. And there are at least 1,400 artifacts that have been discovered already in Saudi Arabia of 200 to 400 foot long black stone monuments that have been made at probably only about a foot height above the ground. But one of them is a long, straight thing about 200 feet long, and at the end of it on one side is a pair of circles, a circle of black rocks, and then right in the middle, a dome of black rocks. And when you measure the waterway that was cut from Atlantis through to Poseidon's Island so that people could go there, that waterway had a length. Poseidon's Island and his rings, concentric rings of it around the palace, had a certain size and relationship to that long channel. When you put them together, they form a line with a circle and a dome in the middle of it. I scaled that down over a picture of some of these strange artifacts. They can't figure out what they represent, and they were an exact scalar match to the island of Poseidon. It was like saying this is Poseidon territory, or this is Atlantis territory. And there was another set of them spread out in that 1,400. They had like a V of two of those black lines coming to a point down to these little rings in the middle of it. And if you look on Poseidon's Island, just the island itself, where he kept his wife, the female, there is a set of rings with that same ratio, and the V-shaped lines coming out from it toward the coast. Those represent the female, his wife. They're smaller, but the ratio is the same as that out in these artifacts. And the straight one with the island at the end of it, the circular thing, those stones represent the male or Poseidon, the big dude. And as I say, they're just all over the place. In fact, some of them are even surrounded as shrines of what the Bedouins call the old men of the time of the old age. And the Bedouins say that their legends say that Arabia used to be an island. So all of these things fit together. Lawrence of Arabia, he was an author in his own right. He looked for the Atlantis of the sands in the empty quarter, the Rub al-Khali there in Saudi Arabia. All of these things tell you we were looking in the wrong place if we looked toward the pillars of Hercules being the what do you call it, at the west end of the Mediterranean. What do you call it? The Straits of Gibraltar. That's not it. That is definitely not it. And once you turn the earth upside down and east becomes west, and once you look for the pillars of Hercules and then the Straits of Hercules are two things. They are there at the junction, at the border between Syria and Turkey. I forget the name of the little town there, but it was called the port of, in the Bible, Antioch, the port of Antioch. And that used to be underwater, and it used to be a shipping port that you could come in, and the Greeks used that as well. So you could come into the waterway that separated Syria and Turkey up to probably 50, 60 miles inland. Anyway, that was the way you entered Atlantis, was through that gateway there at the port of Antioch, long before that time, obviously. But you went up probably 60, 70 miles, and you turned to the right down the waterway, and then did a little jog through the mountains that are part of the mountain range. It's where the Lebanon is, and then Israel is to the right of that, where the Sea of Galilee is. All that's part of the range that had this waterway in between it, and then you dived off to that over into the east of that today, and you found the waterway went straight down into the Persian Gulf, which was a large ocean at the time. And you approached Dammam Island, which was Poseidon's Island, and from a distance on the horizon you could see the glint, the rose kind of gold glint from the rocks that were covered with this orichalca metal. And that orichalca metal, they've all been arguing about what it was. And definitely it was what's called mountain copper, which is an alloy of copper. And that alloy resists corrosion from seawater, and it has a rose gold color. And the mine for that I found over near Mecca on the other side of Saudi Arabia, and they mined gold there, and it's part of the geologic formations to get the gold out. The copper and iron, and what was the other part of the alloy? Anyway, copper, tin, several of the things that you use to make orichalcum were there, all of them, in fact, in these fissures along with the gold. So they took the gold out, smelted the gold off to this side, and they got orichalcum off the other side, which you could, beat thin and cover rocks with and pave streets with. So that was Atlantis in brief. The petroleum industry, some of the geologists in the Middle East have been contacting me. They have applauded the fact that I found the asteroid they were looking for that splashed a lot of the seabed and the mantle backwards from its impact to form a 10,000-foot deep mound of what they call ophiolite, which is seabed and mantle, over Oman and that southeastern portion of Saudi Arabia. It's gradually been leaching off and weathering off and into the seabed, but they could never figure out where the asteroid was that caused that, and I found it. In fact, after I'd made a public disclosure of this, a guy contacted me by Skype from his iPad, or from his, I think it was an iPad, it's either that or a portable Mac. But anyway, he was over in the middle of Mongolia, and he was a petroleum geologist, an American over there working. And he said, just heard your thing. I'm going to send you a copy of a PowerPoint I did for the industry here. We were looking for the source of the ophiolite splash onto southern Arabia, and you found it. And, you'll be pleasantly surprised by what I show you. And I saw his graphs and his cross sections of Oman and the ophiolite deposits. So I'm getting confirmation of this from many sources. And another one just started in Australia, at the Australian National University. I've been conversing with one of the geologists there that are looking for the large asteroid impact somewhere out in the Indian Ocean that deposited little spherules of glass into the strata beneath where they are now, but down into the depths of Western Australia. And they know that they could estimate from the spherules and the deposition of their thickness that an asteroid about 12 to 15 miles in diameter made these things. Well, I found that asteroid, and I told them where it was, and I showed them the path, and they said, oh, no, it couldn't be. They're different geological ages. It couldn't have happened that way. And now then I'm gradually swinging one of them over to my viewpoint. I'm saying, look, here is what you need to allow yourself to accept as a fundamental, as a basis for my argument. Be a scientist. Look at this and say, okay, if what Stanley says is true about the Earth expanding and blah blah blah, then could this impact in eastern coast of India have been the one that formed the Banda Sea and threw all those hot glass beads over into Australia? So that's where we are at the moment. But I'm getting serious interest in this from the professional communities, which is really, really good.
That sounds great. You mentioned energy things to do with, with the petroleum industry and all that in there, which makes me think, back to you had an interview with John Trump in 1982. Do you want to tell our listeners briefly a little bit about that?
Sure. I just put that up, actually, Tony. I saw a report on the television that, President Donald Trump really had a favorite uncle, his mentor in many ways, who he greatly respected, Professor John G. Trump. And I thought, well, I met that guy. In fact, I interviewed him. So I dug back in my records, and it was an Australian film crew out of Queensland at RWB Productions, and they asked me to kind of MC a documentary on the life of Nikola Tesla. Well, part of that was that we flew over to Boston and to New York as well, but to Boston primarily, to see Professor John G. Trump at High Voltage Electronics there. At the time, he was probably 70, 2 or 3, 4, somewhere in that region. And we sat down in his office there. In fact, he took me all around the high voltage laboratory and the assembly area there. But I thought, okay, President Donald Trump would be interested in knowing what his uncle said about free energy, because some of it's in the video on the Eye of the Storm video that was made, but the rest of it was off camera. And what Professor Trump and I talked about in the interview was how he was recruited by the FBI to open up the last kind of secret weapon package or something that Tesla left in the hotel safe there at the Hotel New Yorker as bond or surety against the back rent he owed him because he was so poor in those days, last day of his life. Tesla could not pay his bills on time. In fact, he was never a good money manager anyway, but he was certainly a bright scientist. So I said to Professor Trump, okay, so the FBI recruited you to come and open this box. I said, well, can you tell me about it? So he said, yeah. He said, they came to me and said, Nikola Tesla's just died, and we're gathering all the papers and work he left behind. But there's one box at the Hotel New Yorker that we're a bit reluctant to open without, some professional physicist or something, electronics guy or something, opening it for us so that we don't make a mistake. And the mistake they were thinking they were going to make was that Tesla told the staff, do not touch this. There's a secret to a huge weapon, a world-shaking weapon in here. And so this is why I'm putting this here as my bond against what I owe you, because it's valuable. It's so extremely powerful. It's a great secret. Well, the staff, of course, didn't touch it. They knew how great this guy was and how many things he'd invented, so they believed him. So the FBI agents say to John Trump, they say, well, look, you go up to the counter there. They'll leave the package out for you. We want you to see if we can open it, or you can open it, actually, and we'll hide behind these marble pillars about 40 feet away, so in case it blows up. And Dr. Trump was saying to me, as he was telling me this, you could see the twinkle in his eye and a grin. He said, it's kind of like a wry grin. He says, right, those brave FBI agents said, you go do it, son. So he walked over there and he looked at the box. It was probably about 18 inches wide and about 10, 12 inches deep, and about maybe 8 inches tall, and wrapped in brown paper with twine around it. So he took out his knife and he looked all around, carefully moving the box around to be sure he didn't trip any mercury switches that blow it up or anything like that. And he couldn't find any wires or any reason not to go ahead and cut the twine. So he cuts the twine and lays it down onto the counter there. Now he has brown paper kind of lifting up in places, as the air got to it. So he takes his knife and he gently lifts up a little bit and peeks under to see if there's any wires or trips underneath the paper. Didn't see any. He felt all over the surface of the package, he said, on the sides and bottom, smooth as glass. He said there was nothing hidden under the paper. So he said, I thought, well, you only live once. I'm going to open it up and just be darned with it. So he took the paper off like that, laid it flat on the counter, nothing happened. And in front of him was this beautiful, hand-rubbed and stained wooden box with brass handles on it and brass locks or latches on the front. Beautiful piece of work. So he said, well, here's something else. I've got to open a lid on this. Now, that could be problems. So he goes around, looks around the crack between the lid and the rest of the box. He can't find anything. So he said, well, okay, I'm going to lift this up. So he lifts that up and opens it up. And he said, I didn't blow up. There was no messages in there. It was what's called a decade resistance meter box, or a Wheatstone bridge. That was the forerunner in those days of what we call a multimeter today. It was used to measure resistance and things like that. But the secret was, and John Trump did not see this until I told him during the lecture there, or during the interview, he did not see that the box itself, the function of the box, was the message. Anybody who'd studied Tesla's work knew that his whole life was balancing impedances between a source and a collector of that source. In other words, harmonic motion. You could put a little amount of energy into something at the right frequency, and pretty soon it would store a large amount of energy with that same frequency in, say, the tub of water, or, a gas cylinder that nearly tore his building down in New York. Anyway, he used a binary method of balancing energy inputs and energy collection systems. And there's a little gateway between them, a electronic gateway, if you wish, or electrical gateway. So what Tesla was saying was, if you study my work and you know what I build and what I've said about the upper atmosphere and the energy from the sun and how you can collect it and pump it all over the earth, then you'll know that the message in the box was use the impedance matching concept, the binary concept that Lord Playfair developed and which led to the Wheatstone Bridge we're talking about. That concept will allow you to move the earth if you want to, if you build a big enough lever. Okay, now, so I told Dr. Trump this, and I said, now here's something on your work years ago that was in a magazine that you did research into plates, metal plates in a vacuum, and putting a charge between the two plates. You found out that you could, at 3 million volts per centimeter charge, you could put a force of 5,720 pounds between those plates trying to suck them together from just the charge between those plates in the vacuum of the chamber there. There wasn't even any air or any plastic or anything. And you went on to talk about that the Earth is like a capacitor plate, and the upper atmosphere, the ionosphere up there, is like the other side of the plate, and the air in between is that, well, it's not a vacuum, but it's what they call a dielectric, the inside of a capacitor. And that by varying, pushing the upper Earth's atmosphere toward the surface and bringing it back, you could generate electricity inside the atmosphere just by varying that. And I didn't know why he didn't understand at the time. I did research what he said there later, and it was 20 years later before I filed my patent application for it, but I did see what he was talking about. The solar wind hits the Earth all over the place. It's a bunch of particles. It's not just a breeze. It's a storm of high-energy particles coming from the sun, some iron, protons and copper and things, and they're hitting constantly, and they do not hit all at the same moment. They hit bang, 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 random. When they do, they put a shockwave physically into the atmosphere, and the gentle, or not the gentle, but the total pressure of the solar wind varies from microsecond to microsecond, but that pressure pushes and distorts the ionosphere of the Earth all the way around to the backside of the planet. It's only about 75% distorted back there, as opposed to 100% on the sun side, but it did the whole atmosphere. And this variation could be siphoned off of the atmosphere using a particular kind of device. And that's what that patent application was about. If you see that video on my YouTube channel, and at the last slide, you'll see the reference there to where to go to look at my patent application, which shouldn't be out there on the internet, but the patent office said this can't work, and they put it straight up on the internet and didn't put it in a secure lockbox so that I could refile under that. So in essence, they tried to give away the secret, but say it can't work. The thing with the capacity thing is if you press on the atmosphere and then release it, say it 1,000,000 times a second, that puts that kind of a ripple and change in voltage all the way through the atmosphere, and you can tap it just maybe 15 feet off the ground. You don't have to be up high or anything. You can do it anywhere in the atmosphere. So I'm probably going to develop that further here in the near future. I know that when the first application of this process was invented, it was invented by Dr. T. Henry Murray in Utah years ago. I think he filed his patents in the 30s, and he actually took a working model that was drawing 10 kilowatts out of the atmosphere with his device to the patent office, filed the patent, and took the working model to the patent office. And they said to Mr. Murray, they said, or to Dr. Murray, they said, "Where's the energy coming from that you're getting to come out of this unit?" He said, "Well, actually, I don't know." He says, "It's kind of like irregular. It's like the waves coming on the seashore, irregular patterns. There's some strong, king waves, and then there's just normal waves. But," he says, "I take all of them, and I get the energy out of that." So the patent office said to him, "Well, Dr. Murray, if you don't know where the energy is coming from, we can't give you a patent." They have a working model in front of them, and they can't give him a patent. So he goes home, and eventually he dies in 1978. I talked to his son, and we discussed these things, and looked at a lot of other references he'd written about his research from about 1910 forward. And I realized what the secret of his invention was. It wasn't so much the box that caught the energy and turned it into, household electricity values. It was the antenna. And the antenna is the secret to the whole thing. That's where the energy is captured. So once I learned that, then I filed the patent, which you can read about there on that patent application page I put the link to there. And you can see what I'm talking about. The finesse, the expertise comes in taking that high voltage, high frequency energy coming off that antenna through Tesla step-down coils into usable 120 volt AC, or 240 in your case, 220 down there, and either 50 or 60 cycles per second, so you can use it in your household electricity. But with this, we could have clean, constantly renewing energy as long as the sun is sending a solar wind our direction. And that's enough energy to meet the demands of the planet 100 times over.
Which could cause problems, I suppose, with people that have vested interest in other things that wouldn't want that.
Why wouldn't they invest in this and gradually? I mean, you're not going to flip a switch and say, "Hey, everybody, here's a way to get free electricity in your backyard." They're not going to be able to do it overnight. and they're not going to be able to do it safely unless they know high voltage electronics and tune circuits, that kind of stuff. But we could shift over to that on a gradual scale, a schedule set out, so that we gradually lose our dependence on petroleum products and other polluting types of energy. Gas is a petroleum project as well. But turn your investment that way into building these devices for homes, or building these devices to supply the same electricity to the community through the distribution wires. And maybe 100 years ago, it would have been vested interest like, J.P. Morgan or some of those that would have said, no, you can't tax people for it. We're not going to do it. But now that we're organized and we've got grids and stuff we could feed this into, it would work. And it's not going to destroy the petroleum industry or the car industry overnight. It's going to take decades for us to replace hundreds of millions of automobiles and all of the generators and stuff we got. It's just a long process, but we've got a direction now. And it's not going to hurt anybody.
That's really interesting, actually. Yeah, that's a good point. So I guess we're running short on time. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you on the internet?
Well, if you look for our main website, it's Standeyo, STANDEYO.com. And from there, you can branch off to daretoprepare.com, which is my wife's preparedness free information site. Or you can, on the main page at standeyo.com, you can, right now anyway, you can click on my YouTube channel there for the latest rare video that I uploaded. You can see my YouTube channel and a number of the other videos I've uploaded. And I've got 2 or 3 more coming up in the next week or so, which will be on the Garden of Eden. And, it won't be on the Garden of Eden. It'll be on the Prophetic Carols book Holly wrote, and on the Discovery of Atlantis, and another small interview I did at a conference. But these things I put up there as I get them ready for the internet, and pretty soon Holly and I are going to do audios that we'll put up. We'll make them here on various news topics and whatever, and then we'll put them up onto the YouTube page. So stay tuned type thing.
That sounds great, actually, yeah. Have you got any last thoughts?
Last thoughts. It's a fire. Do I get a blindfold before they shoot me or what? No, Tony, I think I'm talked out for the day. I thank you for having me on again.
Oh, it's been fascinating. Yes, absolutely fascinating. So, yeah, we'll have to do this again before too long.
All right. Well, you take care down there in the land of...
summer. The land of no summer this year.
Yeah, the Lost Island and the land of no summer and whatever else. Goodness gracious. In the Lord of the Rings territory and the Shire down south of you there.
Yep, sweet. And, yeah, thanks for coming on today, Stan. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Tony. Bye-bye now.
Folks, you can find all of our shows and well-written articles by our team at A Minute to Midnight on the aminutetomidnight.com website. We are 100% donations funded too, and we really appreciate it when people do help support us that way. And I write, record and play all the music that you can find in our shows, and you can find a link to rockshawsounds.com, which is where I put all my royalty-free music and sound effects, and there's a link to that which you can get onto from the aminutetomidnight.com website. Well, that's it for today. This is Tony signing off, and we'll catch you with another show in a few days.